Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Ambassadors Roundtable webinar this afternoon with our most recent ambassador to Poland, Mark Brzezinski. I'm Philip Hughes, President of the Council of American Ambassadors. It's my privilege to welcome you this afternoon and remind you that this is the kickoff, actually, of the Council's fall lineup of activities. We began actually about 5 years ago, excuse me, offering to returning American ambassadors, non-career appointees, the opportunity to debrief our membership on their missions abroad, their accomplishments, their challenges, their reactions to the experience, and that reaches not only the audience that's joining us today, but also those who are reached through the posting of the recordings of these debriefings on the Council's website. So tell your friends, and they can always look up what we learned today from Mark on the website, easy to find, free to use, and you can hear again, or they can hear for the first time, Mark's observations this afternoon. I'll mention very quickly that we are already in the midst of a busy fall. Next Wednesday, we will host the annual dinner recognizing the Council's Davis Public Diplomacy Fellows for 2025-26. Our graduating fellows from 2024 to 25 are already out at their posts, so they won't be able to be with us, but we'll have at the Cosmos Club a significant audience of both members and supporters to welcome our new class of fellows whom I just visited actually in Los Angeles at the University of Southern California, where we sponsor them for the Summer Public Diplomacy Institute, and to hear from the Chancellor, founding President, President Emeritus of the Institute of World Politics, the parent institution of our moderator today, Ambassador Aldona Woś, John Lenchowski, who will address us. We will have in 2 weeks, on the 18th of September, another roundtable like this with Ambassador Nathanson to brief us on his mission abroad. Our fall, I should say, conference is coming up on October 14th and 15th. And we will be hosted for a reception on the evening of the 14th by our member, Ambassador Todd Sedgwick, at his new Potomac Riverfront home in Georgetown. That gives you a little preview of what's on tap. And with that, I'd like to turn the proceedings over to Ambassador Woś, who will introduce Ambassador Brzezinski.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Hughes, and welcome to all our guests, and welcome to the Council of American Ambassadors Roundtable, where we speak to America's top diplomatic leaders about issues that are shaping the world. And as mentioned, I'm Ambassador Aldona Woś, and I am honored, from the bottom of my heart, honored to be joined by my colleague, Ambassador Mark Brzezinski. So Ambassador Brzezinski has a distinguished career in public service, in law, in business. And he previously served as the United States ambassador to Sweden during the Obama administration. And then he represented the United States in my hometown country of Warszawa, Poland, during the Biden administration. And this was during the time of historic challenges to European security. And so Mark and I will be discussing US-Polish relations, NATO, the war in the Ukraine, and actually, what does it mean to be a United States ambassador in the 21st century? So I wanted to start with some background and some personal background. So, Mark, you and I share an incredible amount in common. We were blessed to grow up in families that were remarkable patriotic tradition for seeing people that wanted to be in public service. Your grandfather, now this is again a commonality, your grandfather, Tadeusz Brzezinski, was a Polish diplomat who was posted in Germany, seeing the rise of Nazi rule.
That's right.
Then he was posted to the Soviet Union during the Soviet Stalin purge. And subsequently, he was posted to Montreal. Now, your father, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was President Carter's national security advisor and a major public intellectual in foreign affairs. Our link is that my grandfather and my father risked their lives to fight for the freedom of their country, Poland, and at the same time, to save Jews from certain extermination and death during the Holocaust.
Yeah.
For that, they are recognized and awarded at Vad Yashem in Israel's Righteous Gentiles. And subsequently, they ended up in concentration camps. My father was prisoner number 23,504 in Flossenburg concentration camp, and my grandfather, 23,505. They survived because they were liberated by General Patton's 3rd United States Army. And we ended up from Poland to Montreal. So, so there's our common link. So with that commonality, I wanted to ask you your first question, and that is, how did your heritage shape your decision to pursue a career in diplomacy?
Thank you, Ambassador Woś. Thank you, Aldona. What a fantastic way to begin. Let me first say how deeply grateful and thankful I am to have had the opportunity to serve in 2 of America's best embassy posts overseas, in Stockholm and in Warsaw. That has, to me, been such an opportunity to give, but also to grow through those experiences. I am profoundly thankful for the opportunities I was given by President Obama and President Biden. Our common heritage, Aldona, very much affected me in a number of different ways. First of all, commitment to public service. That public service is the highest level of professionalism, and when given an opportunity to serve, you do not say no, but you go all out. That was definitely bred by my parents into my brother, my sister, and I from a very young age. But as you also note, I grew up also in a Slavic household. My father, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was born in Poland, didn't speak a word of English until he was 15 years old, and by age 50 was the national security advisor. My mother, a Czech cast on America's shores by World War II, had a phenomenal artistic career. They each lived the American dream, but the Slavic context very much was present in the Brzezinski household. And it made me interested in what was happening in Central and Eastern Europe in 1989 when the wall came down. And I was finishing graduate school, and I was deciding what career to go into. And diplomacy and public service quickly became a target for me because I saw how I could have a chance to try to make a difference through that career, and that it would be personal to me because of my family background. Now, I'll tell you a story here. My father once pulled me aside when I was a young adult, and he said, "Mark, I know that you want to be a diplomat, but I can tell you that I would never, if I were the national security advisor or the Secretary of State, I would never send you to Poland." And I was like, "Why, Dad?" He goes, because you have a ski at the end of your last name. And I wouldn't send you there because I feel that there would be a pull in terms of your cultural heritage on your professional commitments. I got to tell you, my dad was wrong very few times, and that was one of the times when he was absolutely wrong. I am so glad that President Biden sent me to Poland because it was exactly that background that empowered me, that I was able to bring to U.S. Mission Poland a feel for the Polish people, a sense of their dilemmas and challenges, and I put it to good use as chief of mission. I'll also say that I did a Fulbright scholarship in Poland when I was young, in my 20s, and I learned the language and I wrote a book on the country. So I had a sense of what Poland was. And when President Biden called me on my cell phone in 2021, and I was on my front lawn in Alexandria, Virginia, he said, "Mark, I want you to go to Poland because you wrote a book on something that I want you to directly engage. And that's on the supremacy of law over power. That there's a collision between law and power in Poland today. And I want you to stand on the right side of that, the supremacy of law over power." So those influences, my heritage very much was relevant in terms of the career path and ultimately, thankfully, taking me to Warsaw, Poland as ambassador.
Well, thank you. Perhaps I wanted to ask the next question on your career trajectory. So you first served as United States ambassador to Sweden and then subsequently to Poland. And they were both at very different times in world affairs. So what was the most important lesson that you took from being an ambassador in Sweden to, because you learn, it's all new to us as we go overseas for the
Sure.
first time. So what lesson did you take with you to Poland from Sweden?
Aldona, I'm so glad that I had the chance to run a smaller mission before going to U.S. Embassy Warsaw. U.S. Embassy Sweden is about 220 professionals. Poland is over 600. And when I got to Poland in late 2021, Russia was just gearing up to attack Ukraine, and Ukraine would receive over 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees who remained in the country, and over 9 million who came in and then either went to the West or went back to Ukraine. But there was a tremendous arrival of refugees from Ukraine that the US had to participate in the addressing the needs of. And we had 13,500 US soldiers arrive in Poland. In one case, the 82nd Airborne arrived in 96 hours, some by parachute in Rzeszów, Poland, on the southeastern corner of Poland, on the border of Poland and Ukraine. And the lessons I learned from Sweden for Poland was how to run a mission. What exactly, how do you align with your deputy chief of mission and divvy up the responsibilities and divide the tasks? What are the best ways to empower and mobilize and deploy the 25 sections of an American embassy? What are things that, frankly, you should almost do on instinct when it comes to media and public visibility and addressing the people of the country to which you're assigned? One of the things that an American embassy can do and an American ambassador can do is reassure the people of a foreign country that they are safe and secure. And frankly, Aldona, I boiled it down to that. I was watching television, here in Poland, because I'm speaking to you from Warsaw, Poland right now. When after the Russians invaded Ukraine, there was a sense of anxiety and uncertainty on the streets of Poland. And with the arrival of US troops and their deployment, I was very certain that Poland would be safe and secure. We had thought of every possible contingency. I did not think that the Russians were going to go farther west into Poland. And so I communicated that to the Polish people regularly on television, that Polska jest bezpieczna I Polska jest zabezpieczona. Poland is safe and Poland is secure. And the number of people who said to me, "Thank goodness you said that, because I don't need to know the configurations of an Apache helicopter or of an Abrams tank. What I need to know is that I am safe and secure. So you pick things up that become instinct from a mission, and I did that from Sweden to Poland. So I would say I brought lessons from my ambassadorship, but I also I'm a political appointee, and so I came in from the private sector, and I would say that my career and my experience from the private sector also very much educated me in terms of what to do and the challenges. We wanted to keep Poland economically stable. Putin would have loved for his attack on Ukraine to have economically destabilized Central and Eastern Europe. To the contrary, the economies in this part of the world have risen despite the war next door, and that has been because it's clear to the Western companies here that the countries are resilient and that they remain great places to do business and are very competitive in terms of trade. So different parts of my professional background informed me for my mission in Poland, both my previous ambassadorship and my work from the private sector.
And I think one of the points you have touched upon is something that is really necessary, especially as the next generation of the diplomats are approaching their field, that being an ambassador is more than just representing the policies of the United States. Being an ambassador requires diplomacy, and the part of diplomacy, it has to be useful to the citizen in the host country. Exactly what you have mentioned, they needed your reassurance. They needed some high-level information so that they could comprehend the horrible situation that was unfolding in the world at that time.
Absolutely.
And so it's critical that diplomacy means something to the citizen in the whole home country that they can identify with. So thank you for mentioning that.
No question. And I'll just simply add to that, Aldona, because that's a very important point. What I learned from my first ambassadorship in Sweden is follow closely breaking news and see how it informs your leadership. Often, you will get cables from back in home base, but you have a lot of authority and bandwidth to make decisions as a chief of mission. And after, I saw what had happened as I was preparing to go to Poland when I was in ambassador school in the late summer and fall of 2021. And frankly, I had seen what happened at Kabul airport during the evacuation of Kabul airport, which was chaotic. And there are even authoritative reports showing that there was a lack of preparedness. I knew that both in terms of the humanitarian needs, American security, and politically, we could not see another chaotic evacuation of either American citizens or refugees. So, frankly, that informed me to, well before Russia attacked Ukraine, to develop nothing less than a scientific understanding of the Polish-Ukraine border. There are 8 border crossings on the Polish-Ukraine border. It's 380 miles long. And me and my team, we developed knowledge of every lane, every parking lot, every regional airport, every regional hospital, even veterinarians, because refugees, when they travel, sometimes bring their pets. And we wanted to be ready for any contingency. So when we had lines of tens of thousands of Ukrainians, and mixed in with those lines were American citizens, we were truly, genuinely prepared. And that was not because someone told me to do it. You do it because of instinct. And frankly, by watching the news of developments happening elsewhere and trying to think through what's universal and transferable to your conditions. And that's what I brought to U.S. Mission Poland.
And I do have to share that geography matters and history matters.
Yes, absolutely.
And another, you really walked into your first day, obviously, to you're presenting your credentials as Russia invades the Ukraine.
Right.
I would share on a much smaller scale. I just left post, and all of a sudden what exploded was the first official ever in the world's cyber war when Russia decided to attack Estonia. And again, something that's never happened before in the world. And it was all over again history, taking down a small statue from the center of town of a Russian soldier and then moving it. And that ended up creating our first official cyber war.
Sure.
And again, that showed the world that the dangers of Russia, and then you experienced the same things, the dangers of Russia.
Absolutely.
And so perhaps we can shift now to the US-Polish relationship. And you mentioned in reference to just going back to when you arrive and the sheer overwhelming migration into Poland, into the millions, and subsequently almost 8 million Ukrainian citizens either came through or ended up in Poland. Can you share with us, how does that work? How can other countries use that as a teaching moment, as an example, just like with the cyber war in Estonia, the war, and not the war, but the migration in such vast numbers. I mean, Poland only has
40 million.
40 million people, and you had 8 million plus or minus that came into the country from another country. How did that happen? How did you resolve it? What did the Poles do? What can we learn?
Sure. We were ready for the influx of Ukrainians pouring into Poland logistically. I talked about it before, the roads, also working with the railroads, having dedicated flights pre-positioned for regional airports and so forth. One thing surprised us and wasn't consistent with the history of Central and Eastern Europe, and that was the rush of thousands and thousands of Poles to the Ukrainian border to pick up Ukrainians and take them to their homes and apartments. It was a reactive mobilization of the Polish people to help the Ukrainians that had never occurred in terms of relations in Central Europe or in the history of mass movements of people. When soon after Russia invaded Ukraine, a huge sign was placed over the railroad station in Przemyśl, Poland. Przemyśl is the city closest to the Ukrainian border on the Polish side. And there was a railroad station that many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians would take into the heartland of Poland. And over that railroad was placed a sign by the city with 3 words on it. Tutaj jesteście bezpieczni. Here you are safe. Who in the world does not want to feel safe? And that reactive mobilization of the Polish people surprised us. We were not ready for it. And when I came back to Washington in June 2022 for the annual Chiefs of Missions Conference, I was the only US ambassador at the Chiefs of Missions Conference told to report to the Oval Office for a one-on-one meeting with President Biden around the question. They said, Mark, be prepared to answer the question, what is inspiring the Polish people to react so humanely to this refugee inflow? We were not expecting it. So be prepared to speak to the president about that. And when the president asked me about it, I said, and he asked me why, what's motivating the Polish people to do this? I said to him, for the Poles, this is 1939. And yet this is a time when they can actually do something against a horrific foreign invader coming to attack a Central European country. And so that very much shaped the US-Poland relationship. The reactive mobilization of the Polish people very much impacted the empathy and humanitarian instincts of President Biden, who very soon thereafter came out to Warsaw. First, Vice President Harris came out. 2 weeks later, President Biden came out, and they made a huge visible embrace of the Polish embrace of Ukrainian refugees. And what I asked the president was, please make the Poles know that they are secure as a NATO member, that they will be protected. And the president was cleared in his international address, which is, the West will protect every square inch of Poland. And because he said that, that made the Poles feel secure enough to sacrifice, to continue to embrace Ukrainian refugees, And as I said, 9 million came here, 1.5 million stayed here. Hundreds of thousands of them found jobs. Most of them are women and children. And I think they are here, probably many of them are here permanently now because they've become ensconced in Poland. They're in school, they've gotten jobs, and they feel at home. And as a product of national policy, they were placed into people's homes and apartments. What happened in Poland was the national president went on television and said, it is imperative that we embrace our neighbors. And so as a policy, we are placing them in people's homes and apartments. Imagine if the American president said we have 6 million El Salvadorans, Nicaraguans, Hondurans come into the US-Mexican border. It'll be our national policy to place them into everyone's home and apartment. That is what happened in Poland, and it worked. So it was really unprecedented in terms of movements of refugees. What we learned is that it produced great stability at a time when this region could have become economically and politically destabilized and vulnerable in terms of hybrid security attacks. None of that happened. And I think when the history books are written about this era, the way this region managed this horrific attack by Russia on Ukraine will be seen as partly drawing out some of the best instincts of humanity in this part of the world in terms of dealing with crisis.
Well, thank you. And again, history. Poland has a history of 1,000 years of that. They are very gracious in accepting people to come in. They host and take guests in and take care of them, but they will fight tooth and nail against aggressors till death do us part. And that's just their history, and they proved it once again. So thank you for sharing. Now into current events as of yesterday. So in reference to the Polish-US relationship, so Poland is obviously one of the United States' most critical allies in Europe. How would you describe that relationship moving forward? And if you can comment on yesterday's meeting of President Trump with the President of Poland, President Karol Nawrocki, especially since it was his first visit to the United States since he was elected, and the complexities of the politics inside of Poland before this visit. So if you can just share some light onto that.
Sure. Well, as per what you just said, President-elect Nawrocki of Poland met yesterday in the Oval Office with President Trump, and it was an opportunity for the head of state of Poland to develop chemistry with the broker of the Russia-Ukraine conflict right now, the US president. President Trump is trying to kind of bring them together, and it's not going that well, but he is using the American power to convene to bring Russia and Ukraine together, and Poland has not been at the table while other European leaders have been. That's been to great criticism of Polish society. Since President Trump has been doing that, Poles feel that they have something to share in those talks. They understand what it would take to stabilize Ukraine, and ultimately will be the platform to rebuilding a Ukraine that hopefully is anchored in the West, safe and secure and prosperous. That they're not at the table is a source of outrage here. And it was the goal of President Nawrocki to kind of break into that. There is, though, so much tension between the center-left government under Donald Tusk here in Warsaw and the center-right president-elect Nawrocki that I feel spilled into the visit yesterday. There were no representatives of the Polish government, meaning under the prime minister, included in the presidential delegation. And there was a strong political overtone to at least the opening part of the meeting yesterday when President Trump and President Nawrocki was sitting down. That goes more generally to the very politicized nature of Poland today. In many ways, America is very politicized between left and right today. Well, same thing with Poland. There's, the electorate of President Nawrocki is that demographic of Poland that feels a little bit left out of the economic miracle that occurred in Poland since 1989. They feel that Warsaw, the capital, has been unresponsive to their interests domestically and internationally. And there's some universal and transferable themes to the election of Donald Trump in the United States when it comes to comparing the two countries. And so that's the political context that came to the White House yesterday. The major issues were defense and energy. Poland is home now to over 10,000 American troops. The troops really are absolutely critical to keeping this country secure against Russia. Just a little bit of context, at least the way I see it. Poland is a Slavic country, so are Russia and Ukraine Slavic countries. What the Poles have been doing for almost 4 years, which is to give the guns to the Ukrainians that they're using to defend themselves against Russians, in the mind of Putin, a KGB agent who's the son of a KGB agent, is treason. And if the Russians could do something about it, they would. They've already tried in different hybrid ways to do damage to Poland, and it does not work. But it's been the presence of U.S. troops, particularly the U.S. troops have been spread out, especially on the eastern part of the country. At one point, we had 13,500 U.S. troops here, spread out all across the country, not by chance, with the message from the U.S. Army general in charge of U.S. Army European Command, Darrell Williams, to his Russian counterpart being, if a single American soldier in Poland is hurt or killed, or if a single Polish soldier in Poland is hurt or killed, it's on. We don't seek that. But what we've seen of Russian military, you don't seek that, because it'll be game over in the same day. And that's been, I think, the right thinking, because what we were able to see over the years is the Russian forces very much tried to stay away from where the American forces were positioned. And even when accidents occurred, a Ukrainian missile came into eastern Poland and killed 2 Polish farmers. It was psychologically very revealing that the first person to the podium was not Ukraine or Poland or NATO or the Americans, but the Kremlin, which said, whatever happened in eastern Poland with those 2 farmers being killed, it was not us. So don't blame us, and don't certainly do anything about it to us, because we weren't responsible. That was important in terms of the defense context. Those American troops are still here now, and President Trump said in the meeting that he may even increase the number of U.S. troops, which goes against current rumors that the Trump administration was going to reduce U.S. force presence in Poland. We'll see how that goes. But the second piece of the conversation was about energy. Poland was one of the only 2 countries emerging out of the Soviet bloc. 26 countries emerged out of the Soviet bloc when the Soviet bloc fell apart. 2 of them didn't have any civil nuclear power plants at all, one of which was Poland. And under President Biden, Poland committed $30 billion to build its first U.S. civil nuclear power plant. And he chose, against French competition and Korean competition, intense, U.S. companies Westinghouse and Bechtel. Now the Poles are considering building a second with another $30 billion, and the Americans want to win it again. So it was very much on the agenda, especially from the Trump administration side, to focus on civil nuclear power.
Oh, well, thank you. So let's continue on the line of defense. So Poland is now one of the leading defense spenders in reference to NATO. And no surprise, there's geography and history at stake here. And Poland is definitely shaping the alliance posture for the forward flank. But how do you see this playing out with Poland and NATO, and a broader question, NATO in general, as we really do not see an end to the current conflict, to the current war in Ukraine? Do you sense or see anything, especially since you are where you are currently? Do you sense any hesitation in continuing to spend more and NATO continuing to work together?
No, I see quite the contrary. Northern Europe is booming economically, and there's an understanding here that the countries have to be resilient in terms of security. And so, frankly, there is an invasion of Poland underway, not by an adversary, but by defense contractors and the defense industry. There are literally thousands of defense contractors descending on Warsaw because Poland is underway with a $140 billion defense modernization, building up a reserve force, counter drone force, border security, and so forth. And that has attracted the defense industry, of course, from the traditional sources of the defense industry. But what I have seen at defense conferences here are countries sending their defense industries that have never been seen in Poland before, from Thailand, from Brazil, and from other countries that want to get into the game here. And so the word is out about this modernization. And the country is committed to spending, I believe, over 5%, and is very much applauded by the Americans for getting to the level, the percentage of GDP being spent on defense, because it's invoked for other NATO countries that are not spending nearly that much. I think there's a couple changing aspects to this, Aldona. One is the production of those defense products. More and more of those defense products are being made or refurbished in Poland, by way of example, F-16s or M1A1 Abrams tanks. Some of our most sophisticated fighter jets or battle tanks are being refurbished, reconstructed, or built in Poland. A little more than a decade ago, Poles were kept away from any Abrams tank because it was considered to be a security risk. Now Poles are literally in the tanks making them. It shows how the level of trust has grown between our countries, the degree to which technology is being shared, and that is an important change, because the defense industry has collateral impacts also on the economy in the areas of technology, engineering, biotech, and so forth and so on. Second, much has been learned from the Ukraine war in terms of the defensive and offensive military products that are needed for the future. Drone and counter-drone technology are an example of that. And the innovative and improvisational qualities of the Ukrainians, and often it's Ukrainians and people from the West working together, either by phone or directly, in terms of repairing drones, repairing equipment, literally sometimes on a shoestring, to make the contraption work again. That has captured the attention of Western defense industries, who are looking to acquire some of the small defense startups that you find in Poland and Ukraine because of their innovative ecosystem, and also private equity firms that are looking to create platforms into which they can bring said startups and scale them and grow them. And so what I'm saying is that rather than destabilize the economies of Central and Eastern Europe, what's been happening in Ukraine has created an economic ecosystem that has new dimensions never seen before in this part of the world.
Well, thank you. We should leave some time for questions, but I wanted just to go back to our fathers, but to your father. He left such a lasting mark on U.S. foreign policy. How can we go about learning more about his words of wisdom? Perhaps you'd like to share with us how we can go about reading more of your father's papers and his biography. How can we go about doing that?
Well, I mean, I think that you said it so well, Aldona. I mean, there is this new book by Edward Luce called Zbig, that has just come out, over 500 pages, and tells a great American story of someone who came with $200 in his pocket, a partial scholarship to Harvard for one semester, and in 40 years became one of the leading foreign policy voices for the greatest nation on earth, the United States of America. I think it shows the openness of America. But I will share a story when you talk about my father's wisdom that to me is more personal, and maybe even a little bit more profound. And it was something that he shared with my sister, my brother, and I whenever we had disappointments in our lives. And what he would do, my father was a guy who learned from experience, and he had many setbacks early in his career. And he was quite ambitious, frankly. You knew him. He had certain goals to achieve, to say the least. And whenever my sister Mika Brzezinski or my brother Ian or I would run into a setback, he would say, "Look, when I was a junior professor at Harvard, I had met your mom. We expected to be an academic couple in Boston for the rest of our lives, me at Harvard and she teaching art in Boston. And then I was denied tenure, and I was completely shocked by it. And what I did was make it not a defeat, which is something that brings you down and keeps you down, but a disappointment, something that sets you back, but you grow from." And he asked himself, what did he not do that he should have done as a young academic in Boston? And he said, he answered himself by saying, I should have branched out. I shouldn't have put all my eggs in one basket at Harvard. I should have branched out to business and so forth. And so he went to New York, to Columbia. He went to SIPA, which was then not as strong as a program as it is today. And he became a standout professor there. But more importantly, he reached out to Wall Street, and he became an advisor to Wall Street bankers on political risk, including David Rockefeller. And he and David Rockefeller then decided to set up the Trilateral Commission, which would bring together thinkers from Europe, North America, and Asia. And they invited a young governor from Georgia named Jimmy Carter to be a member of the Trilateral Commission. And after Watergate, my father said, "You're the perfect reflection off of Nixon. You should run for the president." And in 1977, the president-elect invited Zbigniew Brzezinski to be his national security advisor. And my dad would say none of that would have ever happened had I not had that disappointment at Harvard. And by the way, after the Carter administration, Harvard came back many times and offered him tenure. And he said, I've already answered that question.
Well, thank you. And before we move to the last question, I keep revisiting this, but in 2007, both of us were recognized by the President of Poland, receiving awards and medals, and our fathers were there with our families and to witness and celebrate that occasion. And our fathers greeted each other, and my father turned to your father and said, "We," referring to the both of them, the fathers, "we succeeded," pointing to us. And both of them
Nice.
teared up as immigrants, and as myself as an immigrant to the United States, and being able to serve our country, the United States, the freest, most innovative, the most prosperous and generous country in the world. And we're blessed to be able to represent
Absolutely.
our country.
No question, Aldona. So well said.
So I thank you for that. And I'd like to open up, if we may, if there are questions for you, hopefully some hard questions. And let's see, Paul, do we have any questions that we know of?
Yes, Ambassador Gilmore, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is really enlightening, and I certainly was a big fan of your father's. I've got two questions really pretty quickly. Number one, you've been very generous in your discussions about how Poland has greeted the Ukrainian refugees and Ukrainian people and how supportive they are. But it seems to me just over the past several weeks, Poland has reversed itself and is no longer really friendly towards Ukraine. I'd like to get your reaction to that. And then the more important question, which is there's been a lot of discussion lately, and I think you in your comments have said, well, the president's trying to get Ukraine and Russia to the table so that they can talk. It looks to me like that the political and military goals of these two countries are inalterably opposite to each other.
Yeah.
So what is the value in getting these people to a bargaining table at all? Is there some possible middle ground when the goals of the two countries are so different?
Thank you, Ambassador Gilmore, Governor Gilmore. Great to see you on your name on the screen here. and thank you for those questions. You are right that closing in on 4 years, there is a bit of exhaustion in Poland in terms of the social benefits that Ukrainians receive, in terms of even healthcare, special dispensations pertaining to education, and so forth. And the new president has just refused to sign a law that would have extended them. That doesn't mean that the refugees have to leave, but it's just that they're not going to get special dispensations. But it is a signal that closing in on 4 years, there is an exhaustion in terms of taking care of people who you didn't expect, sometimes even in your own home. The anticipation at first after Russia invaded Ukraine was that the war would last a couple of months. We're now at 4 years, and there is a growing feeling, especially on NATO's eastern flank, that the cost of refugees, of supporting and giving assistance to the Ukrainians, has to be borne more by Western Europe. I think a good sign was the gathering that President Trump hosted at the White House several weeks ago, when 7 European leaders accompanied President Zelensky of Ukraine. It showed a seriousness of focus on the part of Europe that Ukraine is Europe's problem, and that pain for Ukraine will be a role that Europe will have to have a leading role in. I had not seen that degree of mind focusing on the part of European leaders up to when I saw that gathering that President Trump convened. When it comes to actually resolving the Russia-Ukraine crisis, I'm afraid, Ambassador Gilmore, you may be right. There are now over 1 million casualties in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. That is an astronomical number on its own terms. But even compare it to when the Soviets had attacked Afghanistan. When the Soviets began to depart Afghanistan, it was after 45,000 Russian casualties. Then the moms began to march on Moscow, demand the Soviets to stop sending their sons to Afghanistan. And that was, so to speak, the political critical mass that triggered the Soviets to begin to pull out of Afghanistan. We are now at over 1 million casualties in the Russia-Ukraine war, and there is no sign of Putin having less resolve. And until we see some degree of flexibility on his part, you're right. The talks may be going nowhere, because it may be that Putin wants all of Ukraine. It's not clear to me where exactly he's willing to stop. And the Ukrainians, on the other hand, have centuries of history of defending their land from the mountainsides and from the hilltops. And they will continue to do this. And they have shown a gutsiness and an improvisational ability to defend their territory that no one expected. So this may go on, unfortunately.
Thank you.
It is telling that President Trump said about a week ago, this conflict is way more difficult than he anticipated when he first started his second term.
Well, thank you. We should
Okay.
thank you, Ambassador Gilmore and Ambassador Rosen.
Yes. Mhm.
Hi, thank you for joining us today, Mark.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you.
What I want to do, and I want to thank you for doing the American Ambassadors Live podcast with us about your dad's book. And I want, for the folks who are listening, it's a great book about his dad, but there's also a lot of good stuff in there about Mark. And so one of the things I want you to do, Mark, is tell the story about how you almost didn't get accepted as ambassador to Poland.
Thank you for that. Yes, I have to tell you, it was a really unexpected twist in the road. In April 2021, President Biden called me on my cell phone in Alexandria, Virginia, and said, Mark, I want you to be my ambassador in Poland. And he actually said to me on the phone that, your father's looking down on us talking. He told me a story about, as a junior senator from Delaware, being sent by the Senate to meet the new then Polish Pope in 1979, and that he understands the Polish people because the Polish Pope said to him in 1979, I'm not going to speak to you today, Senator, as the Pope. I'm going to speak to you today as a Pole. And he said, Mark, with that, you're on your way, get confirmed and get over to Poland. So I was going through my vetting that summer and getting my affairs in order when I got a call from the White House. And they said, Mark, did you not tell us that you're a citizen of Poland? And I go, yeah, I didn't tell you that because I'm not a citizen of Poland. I'm a citizen of the United States. And they go, for some reason, the Polish government is not accepting agrément because they think you're a citizen of Poland and they're declaring you a citizen of Poland. And we've looked into it. The FBI has looked into it. And we also feel that you are not a citizen of Poland, that you're just a US citizen. And in fact, they said the FBI found your father's naturalization documents in Boston federal court in which he specifically renounced any foreign citizenship when he became an American citizen in the 1950s. So we know you're actually not a Polish citizen, but this is a little weird. We give you permission now to navigate this with the Polish authorities because we can't figure it out. And I said, okay. And I said, thanks, thanks for that, but I'll do whatever I can. The Polish ambassador to Washington, Piotr Wilczuk at the time, he's now their ambassador in London, asked me, I was in Maine, asked me to come for my summer vacation to Washington to be interviewed, if you can imagine, by the Polish embassy. This is as a candidate for US ambassadorship. I was interviewed by the Polish embassy about my family's heritage. Where was my great-great-grandmother born? Where was my great-great-grandfather born? I had no idea. And then some of the questions from the consul general at the Polish embassy in Washington, frankly, Jim, they began to kind of overstep a little bit. They began to ask me about my daughter and this type of thing. And I was like, okay, I'm so sorry. I'd love to be ambassador, but this is getting a little weird. So this interview is over. And then they had a hearing in Poland over my citizenship, in which there were people who would advocate saying that I would be a Polish citizen, and people who would say that I wasn't a Polish citizen. And a former Polish ambassador to Washington, Jerzy Kuzminski, represented, so to speak, the side that I am not a Polish citizen, and said that because my mom was born in Czechoslovakia, there was some kind of agreement between the Czechs and the Poles in 1930s, whereby if you're born to a Czech mom, you're not a Polish citizen. So that with that, they declared me a Czech citizen. And when I was leaving Washington to come to Poland as U.S. ambassador to Poland, the Czech ambassador to Washington held a dinner for me and announced that I'm not a Czech citizen, but he hopes that I serve a lot of Czech food at the American embassy in Warsaw. But it was one of the weirdest, most convoluted thing. And what was behind it, Jim, was the Law and Justice Party in Poland, the center-right party, didn't want me here as U.S. ambassador because I would take positions as an unapologetic advocate of Joe Biden, and they didn't want that. And everything ended up okay, but that's all in the book.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim, for the.
Well, thank you for that story. And now, Philip, Ambassador Hughes, I think you also had probably the last question, depending on how lengthy it is.
Oh, it won't be long. Yes, Mark, I hope this isn't an embarrassment or takes you too far out of your lane as a former U.S. ambassador to Poland. But what are Poland's bilateral relations like with neighboring Belarus? I mean, Lukashenko and his government have behaved a lot like accomplices of Putin's aggression, but in years before that aggression and before Putin sort of set them up as his accomplices, there were signs that Lukashenko was trying to distance himself or preserve some maneuvering room for Belarusian independence. And some people say they've lately seen other signs that Lukashenko is trying to get himself a little bit off the hook from Putin. What do you think about all of that? And can Poland and its bilateral relations with Belarus play any kind of constructive role in the lash-up between Russia and Lukashenko?
Ambassador, thank you very much for that question. And, as is the case in diplomacy in many areas. Two things can be true at the same time. On the one hand, the Poles have a resentful and great dislike for the Lukashenko regime and what they have been doing, especially on the Belarus border with Poland. And that's using refugees who they have attracted from very poor countries like Yemen and Somalia and push them over the border into Poland to destabilize that part of Poland. And naturally, it's a cruel beyond belief thing to do, and it's terribly resented by the Poles. But Lukashenko is a slippery character who was literally a Soviet apparatchik up until the end of the Soviet Union and is the longest lasting Soviet leader in this part of the world, still in power. And he has lasted in many ways because he's a terribly slippery and flexible guy who negotiates and navigates all sides. I'm not sharing any secrets when I say that he does a lot of formal and informal outreach through himself, through his son, through Belarusian state-owned companies to continuously explore what can be the next best thing for him and his family. Putin has him under his thumb to a degree, and there's a obsequiousness on the part of Lukashenko to Putin, and you also see Russian troops deploying into Belarus, staging into Ukraine from Belarus, and doing threatening, taking threatening positions close to the NATO border in Belarus. And Lukashenko, I don't think can do anything but allow that, but certainly, is not trying to stop it in any visible way. And so there are many people who think that as bad as Lukashenko is, there may be a deal with this guy. It was interesting to me that President Trump called him before Putin came to Alaska. And I wonder what that was all about, because there have been different ideas that some low-hanging fruit for the West, when it comes to what are some of the kind of retrograde countries of the former Soviet bloc, one of the main ones that is gettable is Belarus in the future. And so watch that space. Lukashenko is a slippery guy looking for a deal. And out of that could come some opportunity for the West.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And with that, we will have to close up. So Ambassador,
Thank you, Aldona.
thank you for sharing your
For a very
thoughts, your
personal interview.
experience.
I appreciate what you said, and we were very lucky with our families, very blessed, and very blessed to have served as ambassadors. Well, I never expected to be an ambassador, so to stand before this group is amazing to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our
And
audience.
thank you all for participating this afternoon.
Thank you.
We'll see you, I hope, on the 18th for Ambassador Nathanson's roundtable. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.